start with the week 2 overview. Those of you who are in my face-to-face class, we are missing class on Monday the 15th due to the Martin Luther King Jr. holiday, but that also means that we are missing a chunk of time, a whole day where there is information that I really need to be covered. I'm a little bit behind because I was over enthusiastic with the amount of things that I wanted to cover within the first week. And so I've had to move some of the things from my plans to the next day that we've met. So this video is kind of covering some of the information that I probably would have covered in class, but I'm also giving you early access to the weekly overview. And those of you who are the online students, you know the drill already. So let's get started, and I'll share my screen here so you can see what I'm talking about with week 2. So this week, we are focusing on the rhetoric of happiness and in rhetoric in general. We're going to discuss rhetoric, rhetorical problems, rhetorical choices that writers and speakers made. We'll also learn how writers consider things like genre and audience and purpose to make particular rhetorical choices that will help to narrow the angle of vision and also persuade through appeals, the rhetorical appeals, sometimes called logical appeals, to logos, ethos, and pathos. Those of you who have either you're still in high school or maybe high school was fairly recent for you, you may have covered those things. They may sound familiar to you if you've done any kind of rhetorical analysis. And of course, anybody who's taken a class with me in the past, we do cover the rhetorical appeals of logos, ethos, and pathos. We will also be including another appeal that some people don't include in their discussion of rhetoric, and that's what's called kairos. I do include that information in my rhetoric lecture, which I will talk about below when we talk about the videos to watch this week. But kairos is, you can think of as timeliness. And as I said, my lecture gets a little bit more into that, but typically the main focus is on 3 rhetorical appeals: logos, ethos, and pathos. So we'll be exploring those things. We'll also discuss how an author's style and voice can work to create different rhetorical effects. And it is my hope that when we're in class, those of you who are in my online class, that we will talk a little bit more about various medium and how various mediums or media, right, different modes of presenting information, quote unquote texts, use different have different rhetorical strategies to get a message out to a particular audience. So the objectives this week, you'll understand what rhetoric is, understand the aspects of the rhetorical situation. You can identify the 5 key components of rhetoric, identify the various rhetorical appeals, learn about the basics of rhetorical analysis, and of course, reflect upon rhetoric in everyday communication. So there are some readings this week. We have a page, actually it's a module. I want you to look at the whole module from the University of Mississippi Rhet Lab. You can click on the first page and navigate with by clicking on the next button down below. If you click up here in the title, it opens up to the table of contents. If you want to see how many things you have to read in this module, sometimes that's helpful from a planning perspective. And you can see that there are several pages. Some of those pages are very, very short, just might be a paragraph. Like if they're talking about logos or talking about pathos or talking about ethos, they might be short pages. There's also sometimes a practice page, as you've seen in previous pages and previous modules from the University of Mississippi. The outcome pages are usually extremely short. It's just kind of a little introduction. So make sure that you look through all of these. And again, this module does not address the rhetorical appeal. Oh, it does a little bit, actually. It does talk about kairos and logos, and kairos and pathos. It doesn't use it as it doesn't treat it as a separate rhetorical appeal all on its own, but in relation to other appeals. So make sure that you read through that whole module. That way you'll start to understand what's going on there. And then the content for this week, we have an article from Darren McMahon, From the Happiness of Virtue to the Virtue of Happiness, 400 BC to AD 1780. And this article is pretty interesting. You have the foundation of Aristotle. You have a little bit of a foundation from reading Voltaire last week. So you can understand some of the things that McMahon is talking about. He kind of takes you through the history of how people have thought about happiness through the ages. So you have that Aristotle and ancient Greek and ancient Roman grounding, and then you go up through the Bible and the early church fathers in the Christian church, and then through the Enlightenment thinkers. So there's a whole lot of name dropping happening in this article. Some of those names you might be familiar with, and others you might have to look up so that you understand. Hopefully this, I'm going to take a look here, make sure that you can access this. Yes, okay. And there are notes from the original article, so it's important to take a look at the footnotes. He brings in a lot of language discussion here, so that ties in with one of the other articles that you will read. He also explains some of the historical or philosophical backgrounds of the things that he is discussing, as well as citing his sources, so citing the people that he refers to, so that you can go on and research further if you want to. So it is several pages. I recommend that you plan accordingly, 12 pages, right? But that's also including the footnotes. So yeah, take some time to read through it. If you need to, break it up into several chunks so you don't get overwhelmed, because it is kind of a deeper reading, but I highly, highly recommend reading this. It's interesting how he approaches this whole kind of an overview of what people have thought about and have written about happiness. So that's the McMahon article. And then the next one is Meacham, Free to Be Happy. This will take you to a URL. This is a lot shorter. If you come down here, there's one page. Make sure that you click on the second page. And this is related somewhat to what McMahon is writing. And then we have a final reading that I just found recently. This one is not in the Pursuing Happiness book that I am basing the course on, but this one is all about, well, the title is How Languages Reflect a Culture's Idea of Happiness. So we're talking about the language that we use when we are discussing happiness, and how that can kind of frame our ideas, but also persuade how we approach the topic of happiness when we're talking about it. So this is kind of from a linguistic perspective, and I just found it to be very interesting, especially discussing the language that other cultures use. So I highly recommend reading this one too, and it's fairly recent. It's from 2021. So it's a good article to read and kind of give you food for thought, so to speak. For the videos this week, I have 2 lectures. There might be an additional one if I have the time to record it, and I've thought a little bit more about things, but to do the main basis here, I have a rhetoric lecture, which is roughly 9 minutes long. That will kind of hit the highlights of the rhetorical situation, rhetorical appeals, what rhetoric is in general. And then I have sort of a philosophical musing, something that, if I were to teach this in class, I would be up there talking about some of the thoughts that are being tossed around in these various articles. So that is my lecture, The Rhetoric of Happiness, which is roughly 18 minutes long. So there are some things that I kind of dip into. I don't go into an in-depth explanation or an exploration of these articles, but I at least indicate how these are related and some of the thought going on in the background, so that you have an understanding uh, of those readings, so that you can complete the assignments for the week. This week we have some more reading questions. Those of you who are in the face-to-face class, it's a good idea to take a look at these, because we might talk through some of these if we have time in class on Wednesday. But of course, it's a good idea to have these in front of you while you are reading, so you have an idea of the things that you need to be looking for while you're reading. So after this week's content, in which we consider the language or rhetoric of happiness, I want you to answer the questions, try your best. Of course, they don't have to be very specific. The first question here is, make a list of the words from other languages that McMahon uses in his article. And I indicate specifically pages 2 to 3 of the PDF. As far as how we are, the words related to happiness. And then how do these other words help you to better define happiness for yourself? The question for the second one, how languages reflect a culture's idea of happiness. In this article, the author introduces the idea of quote unquote linguistic relativity, which puts forth the idea that, quote, language itself shapes our thoughts and perceptions. Do you agree that language or rhetoric surrounding happiness influences how we perceive happiness? So I'm curious what your thoughts are here. And then from the Meacham article, is Meacham's assessment of American ideas about happiness fundamentally pessimistic or optimistic? Carefully consider his conclusion in your response. So it's important that you read through the whole article and understand what he is concluding, right? What is he arguing? And whether or not it's pessimistic or optimistic. So those are the reading questions. And then we have another journal entry. This is a low stakes, but again, another opportunity for you to write a little bit more formally. So I want you to think about the readings that we've had thus far, not just this week, but last week. You can pull in and start to synthesize some of the things that you have read about, watched, and thought about, and maybe even discussed, as well as other things you've read, heard, or viewed that relates to happiness. So here is the prompt, right? What is happiness? The basic answer to the prompt is your working thesis or controlling idea. To develop your thesis, I want you to clarify your definition of happiness. And I may have talked a little bit about this in the Rhetoric of Happiness video. So I want you to try to form a definition of happiness for yourself. And that would include, maybe discussing some synonyms, some of the words from other languages that were written about in the various articles that we have read so far. And to further support your thesis, I want you to try to choose one reading from the course that maybe interested you the most, or has influenced you the most, or has piqued your interest, right? So you can agree or disagree with one of those authors' ideas. So maybe you think that Meacham is completely off base, right? And you want to argue a little bit, or say, I think here's where they got it wrong, and here's where I think I'm going in the right direction. So here you're going to correctly cite the source. So make sure that you follow this text about MLA in text citations. Again, this is not a super formal essay. It's kind of a mini essay because it's only 2 to 3 pages. So it's not going to be a super in-depth analysis of the text, but I want you to show me that you're engaging with the readings while also presenting your own ideas, right? I want to see some kind of progress of reading and responding to a text, thinking critically, and also putting forth your own ideas, because frankly, that's the thing I'm more concerned about, what you think, right? You can say, okay, so and so says this, however, this is what I think, or however, yeah, and I agree with them, and this is why, blah, 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 I think, right? So I want to see that you're engaging with those texts, that you're synthesizing, if not all of those ideas, at least some of those ideas, and also showing me what your own ideas about happiness is. So kind of flesh out a definition of happiness, right? We're trying to figure out what happiness is to me, what happiness is based on these things that other people have said. Do I agree with those things, or do I reject what they're saying, right? And present your own idea instead, right? So hopefully that makes sense to you. Again, I don't want you to feel overwhelmed or anxious about this. Just try your best to put forth your own ideas, to flesh out some kind of a definition of happiness, to think about it, and to engage with the things that you've been reading so far. So everything is due Sunday, the 21st by 11:59 p.m. Again, if you're running into a problem with time management and you need an extension, remember it's your responsibility to communicate with me, so that I'm aware, and it shows me that you care and that you're not just blowing things off, but that you're being responsible, that you're being an adult about it, and taking the initiative to let me know that you do care, right? That you're putting forth the effort. Every effort that you put forth is going to work in your favor. Remember, that's part of the grading contract. If you show up and you do the work, you make a concerted effort, you will pass the class and you will get that B, right? And if you want more than a B, you're going to put in a little bit more extra effort. So again, I'll stop sharing here. If you have any questions regarding anything this week, please, please, please let me know. That's why I'm here. Those of you, especially in the online class, I don't want you to feel like you've been dropped into a completely different world and you're totally lost, right? So if there's any kind of clarification that you need, or if you just need some reassurance that you're on the right track, just reach out to me. That is why I'm here. That is my job. Okay. Take care and have a fantastic week, everybody. Bye-bye.